Hi, everyone. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Amanda Hardin here with us today. She is a nationally certified school psychologist and an assistant professor here at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. So she has a PsyD in school psychology from Capella University and a master's degree in school psychology from Texas State University. So Dr. Hardin has dedicated her career to enhancing student mental health and supporting their academic success. And as part of her workplace experience, she has worked in Bradley County schools here in the Chattanooga area for more than 7 years, and she gained experience working there doing psychoeducational assessments and interventions and behavioral interventions. Her background also includes experience working as an individual and a family counselor as well. So she is currently the program director for the school psychology program here at UTC, and that program is accredited by the National Association of School Psychology as well as the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation. So she is now currently and has been working to educate future school psychologists, and she's going to join us today to tell us a little bit more about the field, about the salary expectations, as well as what does she look for when she's evaluating applicants for her program, and what can you do if you're interested in this field to better prepare yourself for that. So let's just go ahead and jump on in and start asking Dr. Hardin some questions.
The first question I would really like to know, and I've heard this before, but I love hearing it because it's always very interesting to me to like learn how people get into the fields and like find their way in the fields that they are in. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into school psychology?
Yeah. So I, like many school psychologists, kind of fell into this field by surprise. I actually started off undergrad as a magazine journalism major. And that's what like I picked my school on journalism schools and then took a psychology class. It was a neuropsych class as an elective. And my mind was just blown. And so I started taking every elective. I was like, well, I'm taking a psych course. I'm taking a psych course. And then I was like, maybe I don't want to do journalism. And so I switched majors and ended up my passion has always been focused. The brain has always mesmerized me, and so I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in psychology and minored in biology. And then found out that there wasn't a lot I could do with the bachelor's degree in psychology, and was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to come up with a plan. So I knew I liked working with children. I had been a camp counselor and nannied and babysat, and I loved kids. Um, and so I had taken one semester off after I graduated, and I didn't want to take another semester off. So I looked for programs that incorporated psychology and kids and took spring applicants. And that is literally how I picked my program for my first round of grad school. And I was like, school psych, that sounds fantastic. I had no clue really what it was fully, but then as soon as I got into it, I realized it was fantastic, and I was so glad I stumbled upon it. It is still pretty much a hidden gem. A lot of people don't know what school psychologists do. So I often get referred to as being a school counselor, even by my own family, even though I've explained. But so that's how I kind of fell into it. And then I finished that program and actually worked as a school psychologist for 7 years before going back to get my doctorate in school psychology. And I only really did that because I knew I liked teaching. I had taught some like intro to psych courses and stuff at the community college level. And we were actually living in Germany for my husband's job. And part of the deal was while he was there is that any schooling I did, they would pay for 3/4 of it. So, and I didn't want to sit out of the field. So I went back and got my doctorate. Because really, unless you want to do academia and do more teaching, you actually really don't need a doctorate in school psych at all. And it really cost effective wise isn't worth it if you're just going to remain working in the schools, which is about what I would say 90 to 95% of most school psychologists do. because all it really gets you is a little bit of a pay bump, and the pay bump you get is not the equivalent of going to get your doctorate unless you get it paid for. I've always said if someone's going to pay for you, then take them up on it. But otherwise, it's really not cost advantageous to go and pursue your doctorate unless you want to do academia.
And how many years did it take you for like the master's degree versus the PsyD that you completed?
So I did. So that's the thing is, so for school psychology, there you have to have what is called an EDS, an education specialist degree. That is actually now the lowest degree you can have to practice. It's in like Tennessee and in most states. The master's has kind of fallen off. Some schools still offer it, but it's not a terminal thing. You get that master's, but then you continue on to get your EDS. So it's the EDS, and this is what mine was when I went through it, is 3 years. And it's basically 2 years of coursework and then 1 year of internship. I will say most internships are paid. So it's really only 2 years of coursework and then your internship. And then when I went back and got my PsyD, I was lucky enough that I was able to transfer in some of my credits because I had an EDS. And so they took in some. So it took me an additional 3 years to get my PsyD because I had to do I did the coursework, but then the biggest thing was I had to do additional internship hours at like a doctoral level and those kinds of things. And with having a PsyD, my program was more clinical. I could choose to specialize as a PsyD, and you could specialize between either school psych or clinical psych, but we did a lot of the same similar courses. So I had to do a lot more of the clinical aspects than say someone who's doing a PhD in school psych, which is much more research focused and academia based. Mine was much more practitioner clinical based.
So you have had the opportunity of working both in academic settings as well as in school settings. And so could you talk a little bit about like the school settings, like when you worked in Bradley County schools or other schools that you've worked in for internships and that? What did you enjoy the most? What was the most rewarding part of that job?
Yes, so I really enjoy working in the schools. I worked in 5 different states as a school psychologist. And probably the thing I like the most about working in the schools is you get to see the children and the families grow. So I had students in Bradley County who I tested when they were in elementary school in like 5th grade. And then I got to see them come to high school and from the growth they made from elementary to the graduating, it's just mind blowing. There's not many fields that you get to see the difference that, the work you're doing and to get them the help they need can impact their life in such a way from being where, in elementary school, they couldn't talk to anybody. They broke down in tears. They were failing all their classes to they have a social life and are graduating with honors in high school. And that for me was something that I really enjoyed. I actually did work some as well in both residential and doing private testing. And I found those didn't provide those things. It was much more a business model, turn and burn. You're dealing with here's your testing, here's your results, get your services, and then have a nice life. Where within the schools, you really get to see the impact you can have on a child's life and a family's life, as well as having that kind of school community support with the other school psychologists. That was so nice to have rather than being independent on my own. So if I had questions, I can talk with them rather than having to try to just reach out on my own when I was working in private practice.
Can you just tell us maybe a little bit about what it looks like to work in a school system? So is it very assessment heavy? What are the different roles and I guess hats that you have to wear as a school psychologist?
So there are multiple hats. I will say the most common and what you probably do the most of is assessments. So if you like giving IQ tests, achievement tests, social emotional batteries, this is probably a great field for you. And you have to like working with children. Typically for a school psychologist, most of my time is typically spent with doing evaluations, for the children's and doing their testing and gathering information, doing observations, writing the reports, and then attending IEP meetings to basically you go over your results and give your recommendations. And so that is a lot of what you do. The nice thing with school psychology is you have to do that stuff. It's required by the state. You have certain guidelines, but there's also a lot of freedom for if you have different interests or passions that you can do those as well, and you're trained to do. For me, one of my big passions is mental health and counseling. And so that's kind of why I did a stint in residential, because I did more of a counseling aspect. I was kind of burnt out a little bit on testing. And so I just wanted a little bit of change of pace. And so, but I incorporated that into my role as a school psych. And I had students I met with individually every week, as well as I did some social groups with high schoolers with autism and doing some of that stuff. And so for me, being able to incorporate that as well was really beneficial.
That's awesome. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about the challenges? So what are potential challenges that school psychologists face in the field?
So I would say there are two main challenges. Number one is time management. You have to have good time management. And as someone who has ADHD and knows this is a weakness of mine, I had to make sure I stayed really organized, just because you operate on deadlines put in place by the state. So when you are opening an evaluation, it's not like in private practice where, you just set up your dates, you get it done when you can, as soon as possible. No, you have, from when you sign consent, you have 60 days to complete the entire evaluation, write your report, and meet on the results. And you have to do that all within 60 calendar days. And there's no breaks for holidays, summer, Christmas break. Those all count. So you have to, and you're not just testing one kid at a time. You may have 10 evaluations open between your schools that you have to work on additional things they may call you in for. So that's number one, is time management. And number two is paperwork. I will be honest, that is my least favorite thing of the whole job, because I know when I went through graduate school, no one told me about it. No one warned me about how much paperwork there is. And it's there for a reason. I mean, the state has forms that they require for documentation. And then your district typically has paperwork that they have for their documentation. Sometimes you're lucky and they just use both the same. Sometimes you're not. So everything's got to be documented, and it's for your own good. It's for legal purposes, so that everything's in paper, in writing, so that if things come up, or a parent, doesn't agree and pursues legal routes, you have everything in place and documented, and you're covered.
So I'm wondering that you've been in the field of school psychology for a little over 10 years. So can you tell us, how have you seen the field changing in that time? And where do you see the field going in the future for your students that you're working with?
Well, I will tell you, probably one of the biggest catalysts of changes that I have seen is COVID. COVID really brought to focus, because I think it forced them to, looking at mental health more in the schools. We had a lot of students come back with anxiety, social issues, on top of academic issues. And so that is something that I have seen as a big focus and changes that schools are willing to start acknowledging and talking about mental health in the schools. One of the other biggest changes I have seen, and this was in process before COVID, but once again, COVID escalated it, is switching everything to a digital model. So even our assessments that we use, for example, one of the main achievement tests we use within the schools, they're in the spring of 2025, they're coming out with the newest model, and it's digital only. So the days of paper are starting to fade away, and I'm sure it's cost effective, but now, because you can do signatures online, you can hold meetings via Zoom. So it takes away some of those components. But it's still important to know both, because depending on where you work at, your school district, if they have the funds, to switch over digital, your school district not only has to buy the new programs, but they more than likely have to buy iPads.
Mhm.
And so it becomes this cost game. And so, but that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. And as a result, we're actually changing it within our program as well. We had a grant. And so this year, we will start actually doing the digital assessments as well as the paper assessments. We bought iPads for all. Every student will have an iPad and for the assessment classes within our program this year, just because it's a need and it's what some districts are requiring. So,
When the students are graduating from your program, where do they go? So what jobs are they going into? Are there specific areas that you see them getting those jobs and being employed in?
I will say probably 99% of our students get employed in public schools.
Mhm.
And so we do have, like within our program, we have a 100% hire rate. And most students actually end up staying where they do their internship at, which makes sense. And I actually recommend, because then kind of as your first year on your own, you already know that district's paperwork, you already have relationships established, you're not having to redo everything. So we actually try to encourage people when they're picking their internship sites to try to go somewhere that they, want to be. And so for some of our students that we have students from out of state, they go back. So I have one this fall who will be doing her internship in North Carolina. And so that's where most of them work. The other maybe 1% that don't work there will work sometimes in a private school as a school psychologist, or depending on what state you're in, with an EDS, you can actually have a private practice. So the main one closest to us that we get people from that where that applies to is Florida. So Florida EDS students, school sites can have a private practice. And so sometimes they'll go into that and doing that as well. Also, I will say no one does this primarily as their main job right out of way, but a lot of our students will also, with completion of our program, you can get from the licensing board for psychology, the licensed psychological associate certification and license, so that you can do testing working under licensed psychologist. So we have geared our program so that you have all the requirements to get that license as well. And so I will have some students that also on the side, they'll work in the schools, but then make extra money, and particularly over summers.
Mhm.
They'll do that and work for that within. I have one who's doing it up and is getting ready to start in Cleveland, doing that as well on the side.
When they're working in private practice in Florida, for example, where that's an option in that state, is it assessment based then, or do they do any counseling? Do school psychologists do counseling, I guess?
I will say it depends greatly on the district that you are in, whether you do counseling or not. And it's largely due to the extreme shortage we have of school psychologists, just because those things that are required by the state that you have to do, that those often take precedent. And sometimes it's the school psychologist that does counseling, but other times a lot of schools have switched over recently to hiring like BCBAs to do behavior therapy, and then doing the counseling by having their own someone else who's responsible for the counseling. And so, for example, in Bradley County, besides myself, most of our groups were all done by, we had behavior specialists that ran the general groups and did counseling services. And then I only got kids, and I was pretty much did the whole county. I did students who were the most severe. And so I would get put on and do services with them one-on-one.
Okay. So it is like a possibility of
Oh
doing
yeah,
some of
yeah,
those.
no, and
Okay.
it's actually highlighted, and now it's becoming more and more of a necessary as with the focus on mental health,
Mhm.
because you can't kind of just not assess and do it. And I feel it was in the past. And so I know, like within our program, like we have two different basically tracks that everyone completes. There's an assessment path that
Mhm.
builds upon each other, and then we have a mental health counseling path. So it does foundations in mental health, it does counseling skills, they do a whole counseling intervention. And so it all builds upon each other within the program.
One of the things that you mentioned that I thought was really lovely is just how schools are moving towards this team approach to mental health care. So you've got school counselors, you got school psychologists, and you said like also behavior analysts going in there. How does that work? How do you all like kind of work together?
And it is actually fantastic. And I love Tennessee's a little behind. But with multiple mental health grants, schools have also been getting social workers as well.
Oh,
So to add to the team. And so it really becomes a unit. I will say of all the people actually who I worked a lot with was my school counselors. Because the difference is school counselors really only work with regular education and school psychologists only work with special education. So that's kind of one of the main differences. And of course we do much more of the assessments and everything, but I worked really closely because typically you don't want to, just because a student's struggling with like, let's say attention and ADHD stuff, we don't necessarily want to jump from no services to special ed. There's a middle area. And so often what we do is first they'll work with the school counselor. And so maybe if they have ADHD, maybe we'll create a 504 plan. So 504 plans are with regular education and they provide accommodations. And so they will do extra time, breaks as needed, things like this matter that are just accommodate them in the classroom compared to when you get to special education and have an IEP, the individualized education plan, you can also get accommodations on there, all those same accommodations, but then you require modifications. The modifications to instruction to be able to learn. And so that's the main difference. But so it's often a very fluid path between school counselor to school psych, and sometimes even school psych. Like I'll get referred and have to test a kid, and maybe they don't qualify for special education because there's not an adverse educational impact. They don't need that modified instruction, but they have this diagnosis of whatever it may be that impacts them enough that they just need some accommodations. And so I'll refer them and set up a meeting with the school counselor to get a 504 plan in place. So that's kind of my main one. And then we have with behavior specialists and social workers coming in, they are kind of supplementary. So the social workers will often sometimes get us a lot of the background, developmental history, pull in those family units to kind of to support, get students and families connected with outside resources, or help them get set up with resources within the schools. And behavior specialists really take over a lot of times with providing data to see, do we need to have additional behavior services put on their IEP, and doing those and kind of monitoring that. And every 3 years, a student who's in special education, we are required to basically reevaluate. So, and it can just be reviewing existing data, or it can be a full evaluation. But we really then rely on those other people who are working more one-on-one with the students, the counselor, the behavior therapist, social worker, to give us the data to determine, hey, does this kiddo still need to be in special ed? Do we need to make any changes? Do we need to get updated testing? Have we made progress? So it's really a real symbiotic relationship between all of them. And I think it's one of the main perks and benefits of the services that students can get in the schools that a lot of people don't realize are there in place.
Those services and things that you're talking about, you said that most of the graduates of your program are in public schools. So this is not always characteristic of private schools or charter schools.
No, so private schools and charter schools operate a little bit differently. Technically, any private school that's located with whatever school district they were located in is required to provide evaluations and testing, and potentially services as needed. It's also the same for even students that are homeschooled. They can do the testing. The problem is that pretty much only the services you can get if you qualify are what are known as related services. So it's occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language therapy, just because the school district does not have any control over the curriculum or education within a private school or within a homeschool. So that's where it looks a little bit different. And with like private schools, they necessarily, because they are privately funded, they don't necessarily have to follow and do things the same way. And so it's really interesting to be a school psychologist, I feel like, in a private school, because you actually have a lot more freedoms. But like even some of the major ones here in Chattanooga have their own school psychologist. Baylor has their own school psychologist. Macaulay has their own school psychologist. And I actually one day a week contract with Skyuka Hall, a private school here in Chattanooga, to provide services for them. And it's very different, the testing and reports I write for them, compared to in the schools. You're writing it, you're evaluating for eligibility for special education. That is why you evaluate in the schools. You don't necessarily have to evaluate just for that at a private school, because that's not how, because they're privately funded, they can do testing on how they see fit. And you have more time to create programs and do things than maybe, because you have one school compared to, most people. Sometimes you get lucky and you have one school as a school psychologist, but typically it's usually 2 or 3. So like, for example, in Hamilton County, the typical assignment for school psychologists is 2 schools.
So you said that most of your students, when they're on that internship year, that 3rd year, they're getting paid. So I want to talk a little bit about salary. So can you tell me about the salary expectations for, at least in your knowledge with the graduates of your program, for both like that internship year as well as once they have that EDS credential?
I definitely can. I will say, if there was a silver lining to having a shortage of school psychologists, it is that money is being thrown at interns and graduates like nobody's business. So in Tennessee, I will say the average, and not even Tennessee, because I have students in multiple states, I will say the average for internship pay is between, the low end would be 30,000. But all of my ones who are getting that low typically get additional benefits added on, such as one district pays for them to go to the National School Psych Conference as part of their package, because they only do a 30,000 stipend. The other one, they get 30,000, but they get full benefits, and they get actually start earning retirement and pension early. They start getting an extra year. So there's that. All the way to the highest is 70,000 for their internship. So, and pretty much it is open to wherever you would like to go. If it's in Tennessee, if it's not, this past year I had students in Georgia, Tennessee, Washington State, Ohio, and Minnesota. And all of them were paid. And then upon graduation, first year as a school psych, depending on where in Tennessee, depending on where you were at, I would say starting pay ranges from 55 to 80,000. So, and then I have some students like on the West Coast, granted cost of living is more, but in California, Oregon, Washington, and they are making, right off the bat, I think the lowest one is making like 108,000, and another one's making 125,000. So it is pretty. That's one of the things, is that you pretty much start off at a really good pay rate with that.
And with holidays off and summers off and all of that.
That's the thing, is so many people don't realize that, yes, you're getting paid that much money for working 9 months, 180 days. And you get fall break, Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, all those things where that if you were working somewhere else as a first year employee, you're going to be lower on that seniority roll and you may not get the holidays off. And then all summer. The perks for being a school psychologist definitely extend way beyond the pay scale. And for me, one of the things that I really liked, and why I stayed with it, is because too, with if you further down the road, if you're wanting to start a family and have kids, it is really nice to be on the same schedule, and you don't have to worry about child pay over the summer, care over the summer, and things like that. And so it's been really nice.
Yeah, it's a very family friendly job and career path.
Yeah.
So for the students who are now interested, what are you looking for when you're reviewing those applications to your graduate program?
So when we were looking at applications, some of the things we look for is number one, when you write your paragraph about why you want to be in the field, expressing an interest with working with children and the field of psychology, and not just because I literally had someone write, well, it sounded cool and it was close by. Well, probably not going to pick you. So making sure you explain why you want to do it. Also making sure we do interviews for it. And one of the things we look at within the interview process, we typically do a group one and do it via Zoom to make it accessible for all applicants. And but having those social skills, because a lot of what you do is talking, because you often have to, talk and consult with parents, teachers, administrators. And so being able to have those people and social skills is really helpful. And the other thing we look at is making sure that in your undergrad, at some point, there are some like courses that we look for, having some type of child psychology or educational psych, something along those things, abnormal psych class. So just having some of those experiences, which if you're at UTC and you're going through our program, I can tell you, you have everything you need. But those are some of the main things we look for when doing that.
So I know one of the things that students are oftentimes concerned about, and we've heard them ask the question over the past year when you visited my class in person, what about GPA?
So for GPA, we look at, there's a couple things we look at. Number one, we will look at your overall GPA, and we look for a 3.0. However, we also, besides looking at that, if that necessarily doesn't qualify, we will look at what you did your senior year, because we do realize life happens. We're humans. I know I did it myself. My first year of undergrad, I went to school out of state, and freedom wasn't a wonderful thing. And so, maybe I should have attended some more of those 8 o'clock classes that I missed. And my first semester GPA was not great. And it's a lot harder to pull up your GPA than it is to bring it down. So we'll look at that senior year to kind of see if the growth was made, if you had a rough start in doing that. And the reason we look at these things is just because that is one of the main differences between undergrad and graduate school, is the level of depth and work, that it is more intense. And so if you're really struggling and you struggled throughout and there was no growth made, or just in general overall, then graduate school is probably going to be really difficult for you. And our program we keep it short so you can get out that, but fast and get into the working world. But as a result, it's very intensive. So, you're taking four graduate school courses your first 2 semesters of within our program. So we just want to make sure that you're ready and that you're set up for success when coming in.
So some of the things that we talk about in terms of grad school preparation with students is like being a teaching assistant, being volunteering, and trying to join organizations, attend conferences. What things do you care about for a school psychologist? Do you care if they're in research? Do you care if they're in organizations, if they presented? What do you care about?
I feel like those are all perks. We wouldn't necessarily count you out because you haven't, but it definitely makes you stand out, particularly if you've done things with either volunteering with children, maybe Boys and Girls Club or Big Sisters, Big Brothers program, or you've worked in the schools doing something, or camp counselor, like if you have some child related experience, and so that comes through. And the research things also do help, in the fact that it lets us know that you have the capabilities and some of the skills that you'll need. We do a research methods class within our program, and it's really an understanding of being able to, when you get data and or you're reviewing a test and you have all the measures, that you're able to understand what you're reading so that you can interpret things accurately for your report. So that definitely shows us that you have some of those skills that we know you'll need as a school psychologist.
So those undergrad courses and stats and research methods are important for this program.
Yes.
Are there any like professional organizations or networks that you recommend for students who are interested in school psych?
Unfortunately, there's not much undergrad, specifically school psych, but then I definitely think if you have the opportunity and you have the criteria to join like the psychology one, I think is definitely a big benefit. I will say many of our students have done that wherever they did their undergrad. And then once you join our program, we have a school psych student association that most students will join. But so that's one of the main things. And then as well as any organizations that center around doing volunteer things like that, those are all, I think, show a lot more of the social and compassion of individuals that stand out as well.
Okay, so I want to try to see if I can recap appropriately some of the things that you said. So GPA is not necessarily a deal breaker. You're looking for growth, but a minimum ideal GPA with B 3.0, hopefully having courses in psychopathology and in child and adolescent development, and doing well in research methods and stats. Getting into research experience if possible would be great, and psychi and volunteering.
Yep.
Anything else that you think makes students stand out when you're reading through applications that you would recommend?
The only other thing I would recommend is that sometimes that does help stand out is having your own personal connection and displaying that when you do your write-up. Why does it personally matter to you? Why is this field something you want to go in, and relaying that message? A lot of times it could be, we have students that maybe they were in special education, or they had negative experiences and want to make it better, or they have siblings with autism, and expressing, where that passion and desire comes from can really tell a lot about students when we're looking at applications.
Have you seen, like, I guess, more people relying on AI when writing those essays or statements? I know it's still relatively new, but have you encountered any of that when reviewing applications recently?
We have not seen too much of that yet. I will say I feel that and I feel that AI has a purpose and it serves to it. And so what I will see, and I know like some of our students use this, is that they will write it themselves and then basically use AI to help them sound more professional and the vocabulary. And I will say that I think that I think is a great use of it. But you can still tell though when it's writing it compared to when it's all.
Yeah.
But no, so that's what I have seen more and more students using it as a tool, much as what we used spell check for and editor within Microsoft Word.
Okay. Because you're talking about the importance of making it personal and really talking about those underlying motivations for applying to this program, and AI can't do that for you. It could polish something that you have to write that in first place for it to be able to even polish it.
Yeah, and that also shows us your writing skills. And when we do our interview, we actually have some writing prompts and we look at your writing skills just because you do a lot of writing, because all the testing you do, you have to write up the results. And while we teach you and show you how to do like templates for doing scores, each evaluation is about an individual child. So you can't just, have a prompt that you go to for everything. It's all got to be individualized for what's going on with that child, what you see with that child. So being able to have some of those writing skills as well is something that's really helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hardin, for going through all of this. This was incredibly helpful. Is there anything else that you would like to tell students who are considering school psychology that maybe I didn't ask or that you'd like to share?
No, I think that's everything. I will just say, if you're interested in school psychology, make sure when you're looking at programs that you are aware of when cutoff dates are for applying for graduate school, what some of their additional requirements may be. Some programs require you to take the GRE. We used to, but this year, for this upcoming year, we are waiving it for all applicants, and then the following year, it'll actually just be removed as a requirement, because we did not find that it was really that helpful, or there was no relationship between how you scored on the GRE to how you do in our program. So why make you pay another fee? As students, you already have to pay enough fees. So we wanted to take that out of the equation for you. But some of those multiple programs do still require it. So just making sure you're looking at that, and just remember when you're looking at programs and you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, because if you want to have a good fit for what works for you. Because that's essentially what's going to help you be successful in completing the program.
Oh, and that reminds me of something else I saw on the UTC program site is accreditation. So your program has two forms of accreditation. So it's the National Association of School Psychology and the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation. And so do you want to look for programs with both, or just is one okay?
Really, the main thing I would say you look for is the NASP Association. And I'll be honest, it'll be the CAPE one, even for our program, this next round will be going away, just because NASP has now agreed, just this past year, that they're now full and being recognized as a full accreditation body on their own. So you no longer have to have the CAPE. And so, but that's the big one, is the NASP approved. And why that is so important is that when you finish a program, besides getting state licensure, there's also the option to get national certification. It's called your NCSP, so where you're a nationally certified school psychologist. And if you go through a NASP approved program or accredited program, you literally just get to check a box and submit your degree, and it's real easy to get your NCSP. If you don't, then it's up to you to prove that your program meets all the requirements for that would be required of a NASP approved program, and you have to submit case studies. It is a big process. So I definitely recommend it, because depending on where you work, if you have your NCSP, it actually can get you financial benefits. Some school districts provide a stipend if you have your national certification. And then also, if you do want to go to other states, it makes it really easy to get a licensure, because you have that national certification, that pretty much you just submit a copy of that in your degree. And I mean, every state wants their money, but that's it. It's really easy to get licensed in multiple states.
Awesome. Thank you for all of that. I wanted to make sure that students knew what to look for, because there are just so many different program options out there.